A 19-year-old kid buys a patch of dirt in the emptiest part of Utah, chasing a dream nobody else could see. 10 months later, a truck stop clerk 60 miles away swears he saw him get gas. But the timeline says he was already dead. The man who killed him was living in a trailer 3 miles from the farm the whole time. He came by to borrow tools. He shook the family's hands. He looked them in the eye at the search parties he volunteered for. And on his phone, the victim's own phone, investigators found a video. Grainy. Silent. Just enough light to see a man cleaning a gun with blood still on his sleeve. This is the case of Dylan Rounds. And the man who buried him didn't just get away with it for 2 years. He helped look for the body. Lucin, Utah, isn't really a town. It's a name on a map for a stretch of desert near the Nevada border, where the nearest neighbor might be visible only as a speck of dust on the horizon. No stoplights, no gas station, just wind, salt flats, and land cheap enough that a teenager with a dream could actually afford it. That's exactly why 19-year-old Dylan Rounds bought it. Dylan grew up across the state line in Idaho, raised on the kind of hard, early morning farm work that either breaks a kid or gives him a purpose. For Dylan, it was purpose. By the time he was 17, he had already decided what he wanted out of life: his own land, his own crop, his own name on the deed. In 2019, he and his grandfather went in together on a stretch of ground outside Lucin. Dylan spent 2 summers clearing it, grading it, getting it ready. He lived in a camper trailer parked on the property, driving back to Idaho when he could, but mostly staying out there alone with the work. By the spring of 2022, it was finally time. He had his seed in the ground. He had a truck for hauling. He had, for the first time, something that was entirely his. He also had a neighbor. James Brenner was 58 years old, squatting in a trailer a few miles from Dylan's land. He wasn't a stranger passing through. He was a fixture. He helped Dylan around the farm. He was, by every outward account, one of the people Dylan trusted enough to have nearby, in a place with almost no one else around. On Friday, May 27th, 2022, Dylan worked late into the night getting his seed planted before a coming rain. The next day, Saturday, May 28th, he called his grandmother. He told her he couldn't talk long. He needed to move his seed truck into the shed before the weather turned. That was the last time anyone in his family heard his voice. When Dylan didn't check in over the next 2 days, his mother, Candace Cooley, felt something was wrong before anyone else did. On Monday, May 30th, she drove out to the farm herself. What she found didn't look like a young man who'd simply gone quiet for a few days. His truck had been power washed, spotless, in the middle of a dirt farm. The seats looked like they had been moved, adjusted for someone else's frame. There was no sign of Dylan anywhere. She reported him missing that same day. For weeks, the case moved the way missing persons cases in the empty West often do, slowly, painfully, without a body or a crime scene to anchor it. Search parties combed the desert. Volunteers walked grid patterns under a punishing sun, checking dry washes and abandoned structures across a landscape that offered almost nowhere to hide a person and almost everywhere to lose one. On June 9th, the Elko County Sheriff's Office in neighboring Nevada issued its own release, noting that Dylan had reportedly last been seen in Montello, a town 30 miles west of his farm, a detail that only widened the search radius without narrowing the truth. Dylan's story reached national attention through Dateline's Missing in America series that June. His parents, Justin Rounds and Candace Cooley, sat for interviews describing a son who had spent his entire adolescence working toward one goal, land of his own, and who had finally reached it only months before he vanished. They pleaded on camera for anyone with information to come forward, still holding out hope that Dylan was alive somewhere, lost or hurt, waiting to be found. He wasn't. Investigators quietly zeroed in on someone much closer to home. On July 7, 2022, just over a month after Dillon vanished, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office publicly named James Brenner as a suspect. The evidence accumulated slowly, but always in one direction. During the earliest searches of the property, deputies had recovered a pair of Dillon's boots. Lab analysis of a bloodstain on them turned up 2 DNA profiles, Dillon's and Brenner's. Then came the phone. Dillon's cell phone had gone dark along with him, but investigators eventually traced its last signal to a place called Lucin Pond, an isolated body of water near the farm. A search of the pond recovered the device. When forensic examiners pulled the data off it, they found a video, not of Dillon, but seemingly recorded around the time he disappeared. It showed James Brenner with visible bloodstains on his arm and his shirt, calmly cleaning a firearm. When investigators later tested that same shirt, they found Dillon's DNA on it too. Phone records added another layer. On the day Dillon vanished, location data allegedly placed activity from his phone in the same stretch of desert where Brenner had been squatting, the two men's movements overlapping in a place with almost no reason for anyone else to be. Still, for months there was no body, no confirmed murder weapon recovered at the time, no confession, just a mounting case of blood, video, and geography, and a suspect who continued walking free while investigators worked to build something a prosecutor could take to trial. That changed on March 3, 2023, 10 months after Dillon disappeared. James Brenner, now 59, was formally charged with criminal homicide, aggravated murder, and abuse or desecration of a human body. Even with charges filed, the case's most haunting question remained unanswered. Where was Dillon? For over a year longer, his family lived in the suspended grief of not knowing, unable to bury their son, unable to close any part of this. The Rounds family leaned on community searches and organizations like the Missing in America network, still walking the desert, still hoping the land would eventually give up what it was hiding. Advocates who worked alongside the family described the effort as something bigger than one case, a network of volunteers who show up for families precisely because law enforcement resources in remote counties are stretched thin, and because every day without a body is another day a case can stall. Brenner, meanwhile, remained in and out of custody during that stretch, at one point held on unrelated federal firearms charges tied to his status as a felon, the same restricted status that would later resurface in his final plea deal. It did, but only because of a deal. In the spring of 2024, as Brenner's case moved toward trial, his legal team negotiated a plea agreement with prosecutors. The terms were direct. In exchange for a reduced charge, Brenner would lead authorities to Dillon's remains. On April 9, 2024, nearly 2 full years after Dillon Rounds spoke to his grandmother about moving a seed truck ahead of the rain, James Brenner walked detectives out into the remote desert west of Lucin and showed them exactly where he had buried him. On May 15, 2024, Brenner formally pleaded guilty. As part of the agreement, his charge was reduced from first-degree aggravated murder to second-degree murder. The desecration charge was dismissed. He also pleaded guilty to 2 separate counts of possessing a firearm as a restricted person tied to his prior felony history. On July 1, 2024, a judge sentenced him to a term of 3 to 30 years in prison. For a case built almost entirely on physical evidence, bloody boots, a hidden video, a pond that swallowed a phone, the ending came down to something far simpler and more chilling. A killer trading a location for a lighter sentence, giving a family their son's body in exchange for fewer years behind bars. What makes Dillon Rounds' case sit so uneasily isn't just the violence of what happened to him. It's the proximity. Brenner wasn't a stranger who slipped in from some interstate passing through the desert. He was the neighbor, the man who helped on the farm, the one close enough to know Dillon's routines, his truck, his land, close enough to be trusted, and close enough to make sure that trust never once occurred to anyone as the danger it was. Dill and Rounds spent 2 summers building something that was entirely his own, on land so remote it seemed like the safest place in the world to be left alone. It turned out to be the opposite. The isolation that let him build his dream was the same isolation that let someone erase him from it for 2 years, with almost no witnesses but the desert itself. His family still describes the ordeal in 2 parts: the 2 years spent searching for a living son, and the reckoning that followed once they understood they had actually been searching for a grave. Somewhere in that gap is the real horror of this case. Not a stranger in the dark, not a masked figure at the edge of the property line, but a familiar face who had every reason to help look and every reason to know exactly where not to look. For 2 years, the desert kept his secret. It only gave it up when a courtroom deal made it worth revealing.